Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions. This time, continuing on with Trope Talks. We're moving on to sequels here, baby. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below, specifically the Kickstarter. This is a threat. Go check it out. Go read my free prologue and the 5 free chapters that are available as a clickable link at like the top of the description thingy. It should be easy to find. There's a video also explaining things there as well that should be, that will guide you through everything that's in there if you so choose to watch it. Or you can just read through the entire thing. I feel like I did a decent job of explaining things through words, what the plan is, etc., etc. Go check it out, please. Trope sequels. I fucking love sequels. Now, there's a caveat. I love sequels except for when they are in a trilogy. Now, when I mean sequels, of course, like it depends on the sequel, right? If it's the middle book, it's the sequel to the first book. It's the second book in a trilogy. Those kind of suck. I'm not gonna. Those always have middle book syndrome. However, if it's a second book now I know this doesn't just sequels does not just apply to second books. Just bear with me. The second book in a 4-book series, typically a fucking banger, okay? Because it won't have middle book syndrome. I'm reading Words of Radiance right now. I'm on like page 600 something. This book is a fucking banger because it doesn't have middle book syndrome. It's building off of book 1, still leading towards, I don't know how to explain it, but book 2s when they are not the second book in a trilogy, like the series is longer than a trilogy, the second book tends to be an absolute banger because the author is given the author has so much freedom in what to do, because in the second book, right, you can, especially if it's larger than a trilogy, right? If it's the second book in a trilogy, the second book has to start the process of wrapping things up and getting things to the final note, and then the third book deals with the final note. Um, but the second book in a 4-book series, pentology, whatever, those can be bangers because they right the author already did the legwork in book 1 of setting characters up. It's like you already have the characters you enjoy, right? Now, of course, it is dependent upon the characters being likable, right? You got to enjoy being in the POV of the characters. We're just gonna assume they are. So you already know the characters well, right? So you're kind of comfortable, right? You're already comfy. You trust the author. You've read the first book. You're comfy with the characters. Now things can be expanded upon, right? The second book, as long as it's not a trilogy, can expand on things, make things deeper. The second book in a trilogy, while it does expand upon things, it has to still be very tight because it's a trilogy, right? Things have to be done by the third book. So, yes. Uh Sequels in general though, I just love them because I'm both conflicted on one-offs and not, whether or not I like one-offs or not. Like, I love Rogue One, and I used to say like Rogue One doesn't need anything more to it. Star Wars Rogue One is perfect as it is. I love that movie. And then, right, I was not excited for the Andor TV show when it was announced. I thought it was unnecessary. It was gonna be like just filler and nothing interesting. And then it came out, and it is arguably, I think it's currently my third favorite Star Wars show. It is first place Clone Wars, second place Rebels, third place is either Bad Batch or Andor. Bad Batch is ranked highly because I really love the themes that they are tackling within Bad Batch. I don't think on a per episode basis it's that great. It's not like on a if I were to rank individual episodes and stuff like that, I think the Andor episodes are all gonna consistently rank higher. But it depends on how Bad Batch season 3 does, which is gonna be the final season, and how Andor season 2, which is gonna be the final season for Andor, do, right? It depends on those final seasons who's gonna have the third place spot. But yeah, I love. Technically, those were prequels. Well, technically, they're also sequels because they come after episode 3. Anyways, yeah, I think I'm now firmly in the boot of fucking give me the lore, build upon your story, give me sequels, give me that shit.
On paper, sequels are the best idea ever. A good original story gives us a fun plot and setting and introduces us to a vibrant cast of characters. In a perfect world, a sequel gives us more of the stuff we love and shows us our heroes and villains in even more depth and detail than before.
That's what Words of Radiance is doing by Brando Sando. I am loving it.
New threats, new situations.
And then, like, talking about Middle Book Syndrome, that's what I felt happened in Well of Ascension. That's the second book, right? Because it's Final Empire, Well of Ascension, and Hero of Ages. Yeah. Well of Ascension had Middle Book Syndrome. I still thought it was really good. But it didn't... It was... It just... I don't know. I don't know how to explain it off the top of my head here. It just didn't hit for me quite as... It felt Middle Book Syndrome-y to me.
New opportunities for character development, more of the things we already loved. But while that's the theory, in practice...
And then, of course, you know, talking about, like, books 4 and 5 of A Song of Ice and Fire have Middle Book Syndrome because it is George beginning to... He's still expanding on things a little bit, but compared to how he expanded things really in, like, books 2 and 3... When did the Dorn plot get introduced? Was that book 2 or was that book 3? They didn't get it. The Dornish plot did not get introduced in book 4, did it? There's no way the entirety of the Dornish plot is in book 4. I don't think it is. Things are starting, right? Book 6 is going to be very much like consolidating things. Books 4 and 5 are, you know, Middle Book Syndrome because it's still expanding the story, but like not quite ending it yet, right? That's typically what Middle Book Syndrome is for me.
Sequels can be very hit or miss. Some of them do all that good stuff and more. Others can make us retroactively question if the original was even that good to begin with. Turns out, it's not that easy to follow up on Happily Ever After. Now, before we go any further, we do need to do one bit of...
Well, of course, you know, if the story, like, this is my, this is the issue I have with, what is this on my keyboard? What the fuck? I don't know what this is. I'm just gonna wipe it on my pants and deal with it later. I don't know if you guys saw it on my finger. I don't know what. It doesn't smell bad. I think it's chocolate. I don't know how that got there. I'm not messy. It wasn't there before. It just appeared. What the... Okay, anyways. It wasn't there when I ate my breakfast. Anyways. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Happily Ever Afters. This is my problem with the sequel trilogy in Star Wars. Because it wanted to be both a continuation and a next-gen sequel. It wanted to be a passing of the torch, and they flopped hard on it because of the way they, like... I cannot believe Leia allowing the First Order to rise to power the way they did. I refuse to believe that she could not have banded the galaxy together against them, right? The sequels shot themselves in the foot essentially by letting the original cast stay alive, by having them be there from the beginning and stay alive and not get killed off like immediately, right? Even though this would have pissed everyone off, if you're wanting to do like like for the story that they essentially wanted to tell in the sequels, what they had to do was just kill Luke, Leia, and Han in the first one, because that would have sent the galaxy into a spiral. It would have established a threat very easily. Now, of course, it's gonna still upset, like, Star Wars fans are gonna get upset at fucking anything. But, right, for the story that the sequels wanted to tell, centered around Rey, killing off the OGs in Episode 7, I feel, would have been the better call to do than what they ended up doing. If they still want to tell, like, the same story that they were telling, it would have been better, because, or you kill them off before the movie even begins to have us, like, I cannot see Luke going into exile. To me, Luke does not repeat the mistakes of the past. That's the biggest hurdle I will never be able to get over with the sequel trilogy. I personally cannot see Luke making the same mistakes as the past. And he essentially made all of the same mistakes with his new Jedi Order. Leia, I cannot see being incapable of rallying support and keeping the First Order tied down. And also the sequel trilogy did a terrible job of, like, in Episode 7, it kind of, like, I have no grasp in Episode 7 as to how big and powerful the First Order is. Like, I felt completely confused within that movie of, is the First Order a rising power? We know they're the remnants of the Empire, but by them being the remnants, that also subconsciously makes me think that they are very small still. But also, they're very powerful. Like, that flip-flop, I felt very flip-flop by that.
Categorization. There are two categorically different kinds of sequels: continuation
Spent 12 minutes talking, and we're 40 seconds into the video.
sequels and next generation sequels. Continuation sequels follow shortly after the original. There might be a year or two between them, but the main cast is basically the same. Note that this is not the same thing as one long story broken into parts. Some stories are too long to publish in one go, like Lord of the Rings, and since it's just one long narrative with breakpoints, its later parts are not strictly sequels by this definition, since they were planned from the beginning. On the other hand, A New Hope was originally just called Star Wars, and George Lucas didn't start out with any plans to make a part 2. So technically, The Empire Strikes Back is a continuation sequel. This can also happen in serialized shows or comics that keep getting renewed past the point the writers planned. The best continuation sequels feel like they were planned all along. Meanwhile, next generation sequels take place years or decades after the original story.
Batman
Beyond
Beyond
new
slaps.
main cast of bankable young
Fucking
people,
love
while the
that
cast
show.
of the original usually end up serving as mentor figures to the new generation. Some next generation sequels feature none of the original characters, in which case it's less of a sequel and more of another story in the same universe. The Star Wars sequel trilogy is a next generation sequel featuring some of the original cast, while, ironically, Star Trek The Next Generation has almost no crossover with its predecessor series and is functionally its own thing. Starting off with continuation sequels, they've got a bit of an interesting problem. Most of the time, they're a direct follow-up to a story that wasn't built to have a follow-up. The original story was typically self-contained with a satisfying conclusion. The main characters solved whatever problem they had, beat whatever villain was causing them trouble, and chilled out for something approximating a happily ever after. The story ended. That's what an ending is. So why and how is there a sequel? Now, this is not actually a very complicated question to answer. You'd think. Basically, there are three main approaches. Option 1, psych. That happy ending didn't actually fix anything. The bad guy's back, the threats have returned, and the heroes have to do it all over again. This is the easiest answer, and unfortunately, it's also the worst. It retroactively spoils some of the original story. That victory we celebrated wasn't actually a victory at all, and the worst part is, while this story is set up for the heroes to win all over again, maybe even more spectacularly this time, it's not going to have anywhere near the same impact, because not only have we done this song and dance before, you've already told the audience that this win can't be trusted. Sometimes this shows up in a minor way, even in sequels that are otherwise new and original, specifically with how they
like, I don't know how to word it, but like, I don't Episode 5 is not my favorite of the original trilogy. It's my least favorite. This is probably my most controversial opinion. I don't like middle stories. And, right, episode 5 ends with episode 6 being planned, right? So it is very middle book syndrome. It's not a closed ending. I like my stories to have closed endings. If, like... Or, well, I should say, I like my movies to kind of have, again, no, like, I don't know how to word this. I like open endings, but just I think the open ending of the heroes being, no, yeah, I don't know how to word this. It's just, yeah, I don't really care too much for episode 5. Like, I think the hurdles that it has to go for, like, with what we're seeing here, the continuation explanations, it is there's no doubt it is a fantastic sequel. But I like episode 1 more than that, and I like episode 6 because I really like the fucking ending to episode 6. Episode 6 ending the confrontation in the throne room. I think those are all, like, chef's kiss. Amazing.
Handle the romantic subplots. Some writers are, like, allergic to writing couples in happy and stable relationships, so if part 1 has the love interests getting together as part of the grand finale happy ending, part 2 might introduce them broken up or otherwise on the rocks. Bonus points if the sequel introduces a new character to play romantic rival with the heroes. Because everybody loves conflict, right? Let's just put conflict everywhere. If some conflict is good, all conflict has to be great. Sorry if you were expecting a satisfying character arc for these bozos, because this story is oops all conflict, I guess. Option 2 is somewhat better. You don't undo the original victory, but you create a new threat for your heroes to deal with that bears a suspicious resemblance to the first one, but more threatening. This isn't quite as easy as the cop-out solution, but it's pretty easy. While the antagonist may be new, the structure of the conflict will be very similar to the original, because the antagonist is structurally similar to the original threat. Sure, you blew up the first Death Star, but now we're building a new one, and you have to do one additional thing in order to blow this one up. I hope you liked stopping that tech-themed, hero-hating supervillain that lured you in with promises of restoring your glory days, because this time you need to do it while wrangling a stay-at-home dad. Did you like fighting off that time-traveling robot assassin? Have fun fighting off the new one. It shapeshifts this time. While this is a decent setting for character development, the overall plot isn't likely to have many surprises. It's not bad, and we've gotten plenty of very respectable stories out of it, but it doesn't shake things up as much as it could. If anything, it's generally going to feel like the first story is playing out again, but this time all the characters have leveled up. Luke is a full-fledged space wizard, Sarah Connor's been hitting the gym, this time we have the bad guy from season 1 on our side, etc, etc. Again, definitely not bad, but as all subsequent Terminator sequels and every villain after the Frieza saga will attest, it's hard to make it work more than once. Option 3. This is the hard one and also the most interesting one. Don't undo anything, and don't retread anything. Leave what was wrapped up, and move on to new ground.
And that, right, like, here's the thing, like, episode 5 does all 3 of these. Technically, they have to do it all over again, right? The Empire isn't beaten yet, so this is technically a psych. Meet the new boss. We meet Palpatine in episode 5, a genuinely new threat. Is like, you know, we meet Boba Fett in episode 5. That's a new threat. Like what the rebellion deals with, right? This new threat. There is a new threat, I feel like, to the rebellion. And like the way the Empire handles them is a little different. I feel like I don't know what I'm saying.
Like
I'm
a
trying
completely
to
new
say words.
antagonist exposed during the events of the first story, a character arc that builds on the resolution of the original. While this is the best and most creative option, it can be tricky to justify conflict in a post-happy ending world. Instead of continuing a resolved conflict from the first part, finding a new source of conflict still grounded in the original plot, or at least not directly contradicting it, requires some creativity on the part of the creator. Some sequels handle this by introducing a new antagonist who was created or unleashed by the events of the original story. Maybe thanks to their heroic origin story, the hero has popped up on on the radar of a prophecy nemesis who's now gunning for them. Or by solving the first problem, you accidentally pop the top off a sealed evil in a can and now they're off wreaking havoc. Or maybe when the hero gained control of their unorthodox powers in the first story, it didn't stop with the happily ever after, and their abilities keep growing and causing more problems or opening up more questions about how they work. Or maybe, now that the hero's in a good place, they're starting to unravel mysteries of their past that were nothing more than footnotes in the original story. I was very surprised to find that Frozen 2, of all movies, did this very well, marking the first time in history that a direct sequel to a Disney princess movie cleared the hot garbage threshold. And because I like my channel where it is, I won't be using footage for this bit, so enjoy the drawings. Frozen 2 takes the happy ending established in the first movie, sisters reunited, Elsa's magic under control, etc., and expands on it very slightly to make a starting point for the second movie. Sisters a bit unhealthily codependent, Elsa's powers starting to grow in weird ways, Elsa too reckless with her newfound personal freedom, Anna extremely worried about Elsa running off again and getting into trouble. When Elsa's magic accidentally awakens 4 pissed-off elemental spirits, they go on a journey of self-discovery to fix it and save the kingdom. By the end, the sisters have uncovered the generations-old conspiracy that angered the spirits in the first place, discovered the secret story of how their parents first met, and also traumatically relived how their parents died, searching for answers about Elsa's powers. Elsa has functionally become a god and also temporarily died, and Anna has been through the absolute ringer, what with the dead parents, abandoned my sister, dead snowman quadruple threat, and consequently stepped up to develop the emotional maturity, personal responsibility, and big picture perspective required to rule as queen. Meanwhile, Elsa has fully come into her own as what is functionally a goddess, and completed a 2-movie character arc that started with her as a self-imposed prisoner trapped by her fear, middled with her still somewhat trapped by her responsibilities as queen, and ended with her completely free and at peace with herself for the first time ever. It's a sequel good enough that it retroactively makes the climactic happy ending of the first movie feel like a narrative midpoint. Sure, Anna and Elsa are happy at the end of Frozen, but Anna's still a klutzy goofball who's just happy to have her sister back, and Elsa thinks not accidentally injuring anyone is the extent of her power. Anna's not ready to be queen, and Elsa hasn't fully come into her own. It's a happy ending on its own, but the sequel actually makes it seem retroactively incomplete, which is damn impressive. This is also how Steven Universe handled it.
I mean, it could also... The writers could have been planning that the entire time as well. You know, that... Right, like, what a good writer, you know, that just comes across as something a good writer does, as what is narratively satisfying for the story of Frozen 1 is, like, Elsa becoming, like, fully in control of her powers, all that stuff, right, that we see her be at the end of Frozen 2, wouldn't make sense for the story of Frozen 1. And same with Anna's development, right? That's just the natural progression of the story that was told in Frozen 1. And, like, I feel like maybe Frozen 2 was planned. It may not have been approved, right? But I feel like it was something the writers would have genuinely been thinking about, especially if they were confident in the story that they were telling. At least, like, when I'm writing my stories, I'm kind of thinking of, like, where the character is ending is not the end of their story. They still have a full life to live. So, right, I don't want, when a story ends, they still have more to do in their character arc, right? There's still more to do. Whether that gets told or not is unimportant, right? Like, I can leave it up in the air and never finish those things, right? I could, like, have a technical happy ending and just have it be a one-off. Or I can revisit it later and continue on with the with their arc, right? Like, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. Star Wars Episode 6 really did this until the sequel trilogy came out. Episode 6 ending is Luke has come into his powers, but he's still, right? It's up in the air. Is he going to refound the Jedi Order, or is he not? Now, of course, nearly everyone assumes he's going to refound the Jedi Order, right? That is the common belief. Luke's going to bring back the Jedi, especially because of the name, Return of the Jedi. But it's not set in stone. It is not said what he's going to do. We don't know what Luke was going to do in George Lucas's world. What's going to happen to the rebellion, the establishment of the New Republic? what's going to happen now that the Empire has been essentially fully defeated? The head of government is gone. What is going to happen? That is still up in the air at the end of episode 6. Right? But episode 6 still feels like a complete closed, done story. Because it still is. It's just that it's part of what helps make the world feel fleshed out is that there are things outside that do not get resolved. Having things outside, having a couple things, bigger picture things perhaps, or bigger things that are not necessarily at the forefront, but are definitely things lingering, purveying around. That's what helps make the story feel more fleshed out, help the world feel more lived in, right? The question of what's going to happen to the government in the galaxy, not necessarily a question that needs to be answered directly by the story, but that thought is still there. Luke refounding the Jedi Order, not something that needs a direct answer, but that being there and allowing us to think about it, right? That, you know, that thought existing helps the Star Wars trilogy, original trilogy. I hope I'm making sense with that fucking tangent. I feel like I didn't.
Its movie and following epilogue series. After the whole plot got wrapped up at the end of season 5, a 2-year time skip aged up our protagonist. The movie gave us a new antagonist who only knows to go after Steven because of the big "the plot's all fixed now" message he broadcast to the galaxy. And the epilogue series seems to mostly be covering the emotional consequences of Steven single-handedly fixing everyone's problems for 5 straight seasons. While everyone else is doing pretty well and enjoying their happily ever after, Steven is developing some pretty serious complexes about being needed, since he spent his formative years being everyone's emotional support and shoulder to cry on, and now he doesn't know how to handle a world where the people he loves don't need him to fix their problems. This is a really interesting angle on the very concept of the happily ever after, and kind of a devastating takedown of the kid hero fixes everything trope. At the time of recording, the final 10 episodes of Steven Universe Future haven't been released yet, but I'm excited. On a related note, the MCU is built on a foundation of evolving characters through sequels. When Avengers puts Tony through the emotional ringer, following movies make it clear he's developed PTSD from the experience. Cap's defrosting in the modern world at the end of First Avenger sets up all his future man-out-of-time arcs, including how devoted he is to saving the similarly time-displaced Bucky, the only other person on Earth who can understand what he's going through. Now, whether they actually follow through on these juicy character developments is entirely dependent on how the director is feeling that day, but to their credit, they did build on the previous movies to inform the sequels, and it produces a fairly coherent overarching character arc for the main cast. But while that about covers continuation sequels, next generation sequels have a few very unique problems that make them even harder to write than regular ones. For instance, have you ever really liked a hero and then they show up again in a new generation sequel all old and stuff, but for some reason they're just disappointing? Sometimes the problem is that they haven't changed at all. Their character never really developed beyond their most marketable version, only now they're also crusty and old and not doing their own stunts. And sometimes the problem is that this character we liked changed in a way that made us not like them anymore. I don't know why writers love having their kid heroes grow up to be terrible parents, but I'm getting pretty sick.
Yes! Finally, someone else says it. Fucking, that is my least favorite trope. Luke, Han, and Leia being... Okay, well, honestly, it kind of makes sense that Han would be a bad parent. Leia, no. Because Leia grew up... of course, she grew up with adoptive parents, but Leia did grow up in a pretty loving household. I don't think she would have been a terrible parent. Now, of course, you can infer that because of Kylo Ren's inability to directly kill Leia. Well, no, he still fires... No, he doesn't fire the missile in Last Jedi. That was someone else. Some other person fired the missile at the ship in Last Jedi. That almost killed Leia, and then she did her Mary Poppins. But his reluctance to kill Leia could be indicative of how she was the perhaps healthier parent. I don't know. I still believe that Han ignited the lightsaber, even though they kind of that could have been such a cool thing to do, like have Han be the one that ignited the lightsaber. I don't know, like have the relationship between Snoke and Kylo Ren be more of a exceptionally manipulative relationship that Kylo wants to get out of but doesn't know how. Han understands, I don't know, sacrifices himself, knowing what, I don't know, it falls apart when you really think about it. Han sacrificing himself, like, Han doesn't care about the fucking Force. But, yeah, I don't,
Anyway, point is, when you're bringing a hero back for a Next Generation sequel, there are a lot of ways to do it badly. Now, sometimes, when a character gets time-skipped a few decades and comes back old and cool to mentor a new generation of heroes, it actually works pretty well. These are usually the instances when the character has undergone some development, and the character they've become makes sense as an extension for the character they were without being disappointing. For a good example, I love the way they handled old Bruce Wayne in Batman Beyond. He's had to retire from Batmaning due to his health failing, and compared to his younger self, he's much angrier and a lot more ruthless than he used to be. Since he's not a frontline badass anymore, he compensates by doing a lot more sleuthing and detective work and serves as the guy in the chair to the new Batman, who in contrast is rather less serious and composed than young Bruce used to be. Old Bruce has quite literally seen it all. He's completely unfazed by everything short of the Joker coming back from the dead, and even without being able to punch every problem until it goes away, he's more than experienced enough to find other solutions to basically everything. We actually get a point of direct comparison when a time travel crossover puts young Batman and old Bruce in the same room, and while young Batman still has all the badass punchy skills, old Bruce outclasses him in experience and raw scariness. His best line in the episode,
"I can't believe I was ever that green. This is how you interrogate someone."
They're clearly the same person, but what old Bruce lacks in peak physical condition, he makes up for in decades of experience being Batman. Now, the reason why old Bruce works so well
wait, was
is
that Static Shock? Is that no, that's not Static Shock, is it? The color? No, because Static Shock has, like, black hair, right? But the suit coloring kind of gives me Static, the way, oh, it kind of looks like Static Shock, but I thought Static Shock was Disney. I can't remember.
Experience being Batman. Now, the reason why old Bruce works so well is because we don't have to do much work to fill out the intervening decades and figure out how he got to where he is. The premise is very simple and very easy to understand. Years of punching crime in the face took their toll, and when his health started failing, he couldn't be Batman anymore. We even see some intermediate attempts he made to keep himself going, exoskeletons and powered armor to make up for his weakening body. The only confusing part at first is why exactly he's alone at the start of the series, since the Batman we knew always had a couple sidekicks rattling around, but this gets explained later and doesn't detract from the story before then. So old Bruce took a character we were familiar with, added one major development, old age, and naturally progressed from there into a character who retains all of his most important qualities without stagnating. This is why he works really well. But there's a lot more time skip heroes that don't work well at all, so now that I've set the bar, let's look at some examples that failed to clear it. So, the Star Wars sequel trilogy.
Yes!
All other controversy aside, all three members of our original trio make appearances in these movies, but, well, it got a bit dubious. Leia was probably handled the best. When we left her at the end of the original trilogy, she was in a sweet relationship with Han and had just helped save the galaxy. Sometime in the intervening space decades, a brand new evil empire rose from the ashes of the old one, and Leia, who'd stayed in politics, struck out on her own to found the new rebellion. Unfortunately, this is around the time her son turned evil, and she and Han split up because of it. And side note, I am so tired of writers splitting up great relationships for the sake of time skip drama. It's not creative, it's not fun, it just retroactively—
Okay, but to be fair, I don't like the Han and Leia relationship. I think the age gap is a no-no, and the way Han is very, you know, he's not, he ain't the person for Leia, unless he changes, and he doesn't change, right? That makes sense. Like, but, like, the problem here is with the Han and Leia relationship is that I do not think George had Han and Leia getting together at all. I don't think that was his fucking original plan. I don't know what the fuck he was thinking. I think he wanted to do a fucking love triangle. And then he backed out of it. Right? Because Leia tells Han she loves him in episode 5, but then in the same episode, you know, she's very much, doesn't she kiss Luke again, like at the end or something? Like it from what I've heard, I think it was up in the air as to who Leia would end up with when episode 6 was coming out. People weren't sure who she was gonna go with. Was it gonna be Luke or was it gonna be Han? Quite frankly, the sibling reveal comes out of nowhere. That wasn't a thing. That was not really hinted at all in episodes 4 or 5. It comes out of nowhere in episode 6. Really, it's through the right. It's like I don't. They should not have been related. They shouldn't have been. They shouldn't have been related. They shouldn't have been siblings. I think it was like an attempt maybe by George to like try and like give some doubt as to whether or not Luke would survive, because it's like, whoa, because there's another one, that means she could take up the fight. Luke could die here, and then it's up to Leia to save the day or whatever. That's kind of a little bit of the vibes I get from it, looking back on it. But like, they shouldn't have been siblings. Luke and Leia should have gotten together. That's my thought on it. That's really what I would have done.
It makes the relationship seem pointless. Why do you do this? Anyway, when we meet Leia in the new trilogy, she's General Organa, leader of the new rebellion and all-around badass. And while she was always pretty self-reliant in the original trilogy, this is a pretty cool upgrade, and it totally makes sense that someone who started working as a covert political spy for the rebellion as a teenager probably wasn't gonna sit by and let a brand new evil empire take over the galaxy again. It's just pretty—
Exactly, but because of how much time passes, they still pretty much say that, like, they don't, the amount, like, I understand why Leia technically doesn't have the support that she does because of her father being Vader. That gets revealed or whatever in some book or whatever. I still don't fucking like it. I still don't agree that Leia would have so little support after all that she did.
Pretty disappointing that the writers apparently used up all the character development writing her backstory, because Han did nothing until his son turned evil, at which point he abandoned Leia and went back to smuggling, and that is the only thing he did for the rest of his life.
Yep.
So, remember all that character development he had about giving up his scoundrelly ways to become a real hero? Apparently nobody else does, and Luke actually has it worse. Apparently, Mr. Paragon Hero Savior of the whole dang galaxy, most noted for his tendency to never give up on family members even if they're—
Yes! Yes! That's the thing. That's the key thing. There are things when it comes to stories, character development, I mean, people in real life. There are some things about people that are never going to change. That is just how people are. No one is going to be willing to change everything about them. No one's like that. Luke's thing that he is stalwart on, no matter fucking what, is that he never gives up on family. Vader committed a fucking genocide on at least one group of people, the Jedi. He's perhaps played a part in the genocide of multiple other civilizations, which really, you know, really fucked up. But Luke still believes that Vader can turn away from the dark side, although, you know, again, he committed genocide, and that's really fucked up. And really the question of, can someone come back from that is like, you know, it's kind of like, no, they can't, but also like, you know, Vader's the only one that can get rid of Palpatine. It's just, Luke was, from what we know, Kylo doesn't commit a fucking genocide, and Luke gives up on him because he hears one bad thought. Like, I understand, like, the way people online are like, yeah, but he, you know, he regretted his decision the moment he made it. Never once, right? Like, here's the thing, like, yes, Luke got angry here in episode 6. He lets the anger get to him in episode 5. He let it get to him in episode 6. To me, that's the thing that would change as he gets older. He doesn't do that anymore. That would be his natural character development, is that he remains stalwart about his family, and that's what would get him killed. That is what gets him killed, because that's what brings him back in The Last Jedi. But I don't like that it should never have left. He should have always remained stalwart and trying to keep Kylo good. It just, Ah.
They're super evil, made a cursory attempt to revive the Jedi Order, and then when his nephew turned evil and killed everybody, he gave up forever and ran off to a distant planet to sulk for the rest of his life.
Like, this does make sense. I disagree with it, but it does make sense if we, like, keep Luke one note, and he doesn't really change. And he still has those moments of, like, anger and, like, you know, cut the head off the snake, whatever. But to me, it's his decisions afterwards that don't make sense. He doesn't run away. Even when he makes a mistake, he doesn't run away. He keeps trying. That's the thing that makes Luke so fucking great. That's what I love about Luke, is that he keeps trying. He never gives up. And then in the sequel trilogy, they have him fucking give up.
Like, I get that they wanted to give Luke a character arc about rediscovering his hope for the future of the Jedi, but Luke was supposed to be the future of the Jedi.
Yes! And they're even reinforcing that in the Mandalorian, it feels like. With Luke's new Jedi Order. Like Ahsoka, all of it just, they're not,
He's the dang return of the Jedi. It genuinely does not make sense to take his character and turn him into a generic, jaded, reluctant mentor. I mean, you're telling me Luke Skywalker, who fought relentlessly to redeem his father after he turned to the dark side, slaughtered the Jedi, and joined ranks with an evil space wizard, didn't have it in him to give it another shot when his nephew did the exact same thing?
Yep.
Now, while this annoys me to no end, I do understand why this happens, and it's a problem of pacing. See, when you're writing a story about a bunch of heroes doing stuff, things happen pretty quickly. Characters act and react, plot twists do their thing. This is how things work in plot time. But when you're not in plot time, you're in downtime. Downtime is what happens when the camera is off the plot. It's the off-screen stuff, the backstory, the context, the time skips. And the pacing on downtime is a lot slower than the main plot, because it's described in much broader strokes. This plays a big role in time skip sequels, but it shows up more frequently in backstories and prequels, so let's jump over there for a minute. Before the story begins, the heroes are living in downtime. It's their backstory. Luke does basically nothing for the first 18 years of his life because his story at this point is Farm Boy. Han is another good example because we got a quick rundown of his downtime backstory in the original trilogy, smuggler, friends with Chewie, did the Kessel Run, and then Solo came along to flesh out his backstory and in adapting downtime to plot time also added like 15 other things. The density of events and character development in plot time is much higher than downtime, and when you're trying to adapt downtime into plot time, the end result often doesn't resemble the original. Jumping genres for a minute, Magneto is another good example of this split. When he shows up in the first X-Men movie, we glean that he survived the Holocaust as a child, came to the reasonable conclusion that humans are terrible, and became a supervillain advocating for mutant supremacy. This is pretty simple and fills out an implied several decades of his life with doesn't trust humans, uses powers for evil. But when you start retroactively filling in the details for these backstories, what was once downtime becomes a lot more detailed. Also, the X-Men prequel movies are so enamored with Magneto's complex relationship with heroism that they accidentally used up all his character development decades before he's supposed to be the villain we see in the original movies. My favorite retcon was in X-Men Apocalypse, when they'd already developed him far enough from his origins that they felt the need to give him a second tragic villain origin story and gave him a new family just so they could kill it. He ends that movie a full-on hero, by the way. I love it when villain origins write themselves into a corner and make the bad guys way too sympathetic. Anyway, the point is, both these examples demonstrate what happens when a writer tries to turn downtime into plot time. They end up having to do a lot of work to fill in the details and spice up the pacing, and the story that results often doesn't really resemble the downtime that was originally described. And the opposite is all.
This is actually the issue we are seeing with House of the Dragon, actually, I feel like. Because when you read Fire and Blood, you read through the events of the war, right? Season 1 was about the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons. There is a lot of downtime in in that prelude of those like 10-ish, 20-ish years leading up to the dance, right? From when we meet Rhaenyra to then Rhaenyra being an adult, and then Lucerys Velaryon getting killed. Around Storm's End. There is a lot of downtime. Now, there isn't much downtime within the war itself, right? There's a lot happening within the war that I think will make great TV. But they needed to do the Viserys' reign. They needed to establish the Great Council. They needed to establish the misogyny that is around, why they do not want why Rhaenyra cannot inherit the misogyny inherent within the society. They need to establish all of these things, the pieces moving together, but because of the way George wrote it, because he wrote it like history originally, it is spread out over the course, and of course it makes sense within our real life time frame, right? When you read it, it adds up, right? Like it makes sense within our. It just makes sense when you read it. But then you go and watch it. If they were to do it like 1-to-1, the plot pacing would not be right. It would not be good. They needed to do it right. Like I give them a lot of freedom. Like I have issues with it. I think there are some things I would have done differently, but largely, I think they did a fantastic job with adapting it. Now I have disagreements with them aging down Alicent, because Rhaenyra and what was her name? Laena Velaryon, Daemon's second wife. Laena and Rhaenyra were best friends. What I would have done was I would have made Alicent, Rhaenyra, Laena all around the same age. Now, of course, then this changes. Like, why does Viserys pick Alicent over Laena, right? That you'd have to mess around with that, because by aging down Alicent, you know, you have that issue. That issue didn't quite make sense in the book why Viserys chooses Alicent over Laena, because Laena is 12 in the book and Alicent is like in her early 20s, I think. Whereas in the show they make Alicent like 15. Laena is still 12. It don't mesh. It don't do good. Because then you're also having Viserys marry someone that is the same age as his daughter, and the person that they tried painting Viserys as, because it with what they were kind of showing in the show, is I don't think that version of Viserys would marry someone the same age as his daughter, especially his daughter's like best friend. I think they needed to. That's one part of the story that I think needed to get fleshed out and workshopped more. That's the one thing really in the whole season 1 that bothers me. Everything else I thought they did fine with. Anyways,
Also true when you start doing
forgot what I was
sequels.
saying.
Following up plot time with downtime feels extremely weird, because if you're not careful, the characters end up doing almost nothing compared to what we're used to from them. Now, filling out downtime with a prequel can be tricky enough, but to write a next-gen sequel, you have to append a whole time skip of downtime to the end of the original story.
Yes.
And the problem is, if we're used to seeing these characters act in plot time, they can seem incredibly passive when we zoom out and fill out decades of their life with downtime. A character who did...
Which is why, again, the sequel trilogy legitimately fucked up so badly because they had it so easy for them for what they could have done. The downtime for Luke and Leia was essentially set in stone and simple. Leia becomes essentially the leader of the Republic. Now, of course, she can still make mistakes, right? And her character progression is her struggling, like, in that downtime, is her struggling with that inability to, like, right? She's used to being like essentially the de facto head, small stuff, right? Small rebellion kind of leader, to now leader of the Republic. Although you could argue with episode 6, kind of Mon Mothma is supposed to be the leader of the Republic, blah, blah, blah. Luke Skywalker builds a new Jedi Order. That's his downtime. But then the sequels fucking throw that all out the fucking window.
24 very important things in the space of 1 year in the story, who then does maybe 3 things in the following 2 decades of time skip downtime, will feel implicitly out of character because they're not doing enough. Leia's version works because found and lead a new rebellion and having your son turn evil are both fairly eventful, and we get the impression she's been doing a lot in the intervening decades.
Yes.
She's quite different in a lot of ways. But Luke and Han are a problem because you get the impression that once Ben turned evil, neither of them did anything for 30 years. And this wouldn't frustrate us if we didn't have the original trilogy to compare it to, but unfortunately, we already know these characters and we know how they're supposed to act. If we had nothing but the sequel trilogy and we meet this badass mentor lady called General Organa and she's like, oh yes, my space wizard brother could help, but he is in self-imposed exile because my son turned evil and killed his students and you must seek him out. We'd be like, ah, that's a reasonable origin for a reluctant mentor. But unfortunately, that's Luke Skywalker. We already know who he is and how he's supposed to act. Not to
Red is making me feel so validated right now. I feel so fucking...
mention the character they turned him into is basically just Yoda, but without the sense of humor, and we've already seen that. This is also...
Yes! Because that's that's Ben Kenobi.
One of the frustrations I had with Legend of Korra. While we don't get much of the original gang, the little we see makes it seem like after the whole saving the world thing, they basically founded one city and then called it a day.
Yeah. Toph becoming the leader of police didn't really make sense to me. I still largely do enjoy Legend of Korra because I do think the core cast are phenomenal. It's just their handling of the previous generation was a big miss for me. Like Aang, like it does make sense that Aang would maybe subconsciously and unintentionally spend more time with his airbending son Tenzin than his other two children, right? That makes sense. That does make a bit of sense, but it also feels at the same time, while it makes sense, it also kind of is like, but would Aang really I feel like Aang would still show love to the other kids, right?
Toph is straight up pulling a Yoda and living in a swamp, and Katara's only role in the show is Korra's waterbending teacher. I don't know, man. I just expected more. And where the hell is Sokka? Now, obviously, it's hard.
And then of course, not having Sokka really was a big miss. And then like it kind of felt like, I don't know, it kind of feels like maybe they wanted, they weren't sure. Like, they excluded Sokka and Azula because they weren't, they didn't know where they were gonna, like, they excluded Sokka and Suki and Azula because they are not sure where their arcs are gonna end yet in the comics or whatever when Korra was, like, coming out. They weren't sure what to do with them and where they would be, whereas they, like, they know, like, for Korra to exist, Aang's gotta die. Aang's gotta pass away. They know where Aang's gonna go. Katara, I largely agree with her kind of being kind of just, like, maybe wanting that calmer life when things die down. She doesn't seem like someone that would want to be a leader of a city or anything. That's Sokka's thing. I think maybe in her younger days, she would want to be up front and in front of things and wanting to help people out, but I think in her older age she'd want to be more of that, just a mentor, just a chill old woman that's a healer, helps teach other people how to heal. That's her thing. Toph running away and kind of fucking off to nowhere makes more sense than her being a cop, you know. Toph kind of just, like, I don't know, that one. Toph fucking off to a swamp kind of makes sense. Like, she just doesn't want to be bothered. Although that does kind of contradict her arc, where she kind of becomes more social and friendly with people throughout Avatar: The Last Airbender. Yeah, they really fumbled with the they fumbled with the original generation in Korra. I still think they did a good job though with the new group. I do like Korra as a character for the most part. It's just that the story, the things around her just did not service her well. I think they really fumbled the bag on things. Season 2 was just trash. I think it could have been good, but right, like, I don't know.
hard to strike a balance in a next-gen sequel, because you don't want your old heroes to overshadow the new ones, but you also don't want the old heroes to seem pointless or unnecessary, or worst of all, out of character. And while you certainly don't have to fill out the entire time skip with everything this character did, it's best to make sure that the character you get at the end is recognizable as the character you had in the beginning, while still having changed somewhat in the intervening years. Luke was changed too much in ways that didn't make sense and ended up nearly unrecognizable. Han didn't change at all and actually rolled back all his original character development. Leia changed enough that we were happy to see her doing so well, but not so much that we couldn't see the resemblance to her younger self anymore. This is kind of the Goldilocks zone of post-time skip character development. Okay, so, sequels can be great on paper, but the execution can be surprisingly tricky to pull off. Continuation sequels can be hard to justify. Next-gen sequels have the added hurdle of convincingly aging up your original heroes. A well-done sequel can retroactively make the original story feel like it was always meant to be part one of many, but a badly done sequel can make you retroactively hate the original by spoiling its victories or happy ending. Pacing is very different between downtime and plot time, but they're not totally incongruous. You've just got to make sure to line them up properly, otherwise your characters might feel weirdly passive during the skips. I'm really grateful to the Star Wars sequels for making such a good bad example for so many things. So, yeah.
And that was Trope Talk sequels. I'm out of breath. The over 15-minute video here. Oops. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.